This is going to save you thousands and thousands of dollars. Like, it makes me sick how much money I wasted.
What's up, guys? My name's Steve. Or is it Ben? I'm a career firefighter and paramedic, accomplished nightclub DJ and producer, avid traveler, and man of 1,000 hobbies. That's me. That's me. And that's me. Oh, and I was also on TV for a while.
Down to 20. Steve, take over for me.
That's me right there. You're not here because of that. You're here because this is me. I've decided to work my way up from zero training to instrument-rated commercial pilot, and I'm taking you along on the journey with me. We may hit some turbulence along the way, but I'm okay with that. Welcome to my channel.
Roger, runway 16, Airline.
Runway 16, clear for landing.
Have you been thinking about becoming a pilot, but you're overwhelmed by all the things you have to know and learn? We've all been there. I'm going to walk you through this. Today, we're going to be talking about how to become a pilot and the things I would change if I could do it over again. We're going to be covering what I would call the standard path to becoming a pilot. So there have been a lot of recent rule changes regarding light sport aircraft and recreational pilots. That's not what we're going to cover today. That can be in a different video because there's a lot of changes in that area. When I say the standard path to becoming a pilot, I mean getting your private pilot, your instrument rating, your commercial, and then moving on from there. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So how do you become a pilot? Well, let's talk about the minimum requirements to even start to pursue a private pilot license in the US. So you have to be at least 17 years of age. You need to be able to read, write, and speak English, and you have to be able to hold a third-class FAA medical certificate. And that's where we're going to start. If you are unable to pass an FAA medical exam, none of the rest of this stuff matters, and that's why we're going to start there. So there's 3 classes of FAA medicals: first, second, and third class. For your private pilot, you only need to worry about third class. I would get the ball rolling on that before anything else, because if you find out for some reason you're not able to pass that medical, whether that's previous legal issues, substance abuse issues, or just health issues in general, none of the rest of that is going to matter, and you're going to waste your own time and your money. So start there. I would get the ball rolling on that as soon as possible. It's very easy, you guys. All you're gonna do is look up an FAA medical examiner near you, and then you're gonna schedule your FAA medical exam. Now, the third class medical exam is a very basic medical exam. When I did mine, they essentially took my vitals, they did an eye test, and some sort of hormone panel. I had to give a urine sample. So one thing they did tell me in my third class FAA medical is that I wouldn't have passed a first class exam, basically just due to my eyesight. When I took the eye exam, it wasn't exactly 20/20, and it's got to be corrected to 20/20. I found out later I have astigmatisms. I don't have any actual vision problems, but I have astigmatisms that cause me to technically not be able to pass that. Had I been going for a first class, I would have failed. But I had it within the tolerances for my third class medical. Now, I'll give you some warning, guys. I don't know specifically all the exact things that they take into account, but I do know that if you have any sort of mental health issues, I know that causes a lot more hurdles in your journey. Doesn't mean you can't get a medical, but they look into your history a lot closer, especially with some of the meds that you may be taking. So just keep that in mind. So next, let's talk about your private pilot certificate. A lot of people call it your private pilot license. Technically, it's called your private pilot certificate with the FAA. What is that? What are you able to do with that? And what does it mean? Does that mean you're a pilot of a private jet? It does not, and that's a common mistake. Private pilot just means that you can go out flying recreationally and carry passengers. You cannot fly in the clouds or without reference to the ground. So you are what they call VFR only, or visual flight rules only. So you always have to have a reference to the ground. So no flying in bad weather for you yet. You can also carry passengers, but you cannot accept any money related to flying. So let's say your buddy says, hey, would you fly me? I'll throw you $100 or I'll give you a gift certificate or something. You are not able to do that. That would technically be accepting compensation for flying. You can't accept compensation for any aviation-related activities with a private pilot license or a private pilot certificate. So, what does your private pilot certificate require? Well, first of all, it requires you to get some knowledge, some book knowledge that we call ground school, okay? And this is a good time to pause and talk about which type of flight school you're going to be attending. So there's two different paths in terms of flight schools of what type of structure and everything that they have. So there's what I did and what a lot of people do, which is called Part 61. So there are different requirements for Part 61, which is essentially you gain your own ground knowledge. So you might take an online ground school, or you might work with an instructor and do your ground knowledge portion. And then you kind of fly as you're able, and you can work with different CFIs, that's certified flight instructors. You could go to different schools if you want to and split your time. The other path to this is called a Part 141 school. Now this is most common with people who are trying to go to the airlines as a career. So Part 141 schools are very expensive. They're extremely structured, and they're, like I said, they're geared towards people who are trying to get to the airlines as a career in pretty much the shortest time possible. So this is a full-time school that you attend. So that's kind of your whole job. 40 hours a week, you're going to this Part 141 school. You're doing ground knowledge part of the day, you're going out flying part of the day, and you gain your hours really quickly. They do have some different hours requirements than the Part 61 path. It's not a huge difference, but there are some minor differences. Primarily, we're going to be talking about Part 61. If you're looking into this, I'm going to assume that you haven't tried to go to an airline as a career, or you likely already know this stuff. So continuing on with Part 61, let's talk about Part 61 requirements. So what does it take to get your private pilot certificate under a Part 61 school? Well, first of all, you need a total of 40 hours of flight time. Now, that is the bare minimum, and most people do not hit it at 40 hours. Within that 40 hours, you need at least 20 hours of that with a flight instructor. After that, if you're signed off, you can do what's called solo time. As crazy as it sounds, part of getting your pilot certificate is flying by yourself before you have the pilot certificate. You'll actually need a student pilot certificate, and your CFI will walk you through that when you get to that point. So you need that 20 hours of instruction. You need at least 10 hours of solo flight time. Within that 10 hours, you need to have done cross-country time. What is cross-country time in terms of aviation? Cross-country time is taking off at an airport that is at least 50 nautical miles from your next airport. And that's in a straight line. You can't zigzag and make 50 miles. So it's got to be over 50 miles, nautical miles, from one spot to another. That's considered cross-country time. So for your private pilot certificate, you're going to need at least 5 hours of cross-country time. And within that 5 hours, you have to have done a long cross-country. So that's going to be a cross-country with 3 different airports and a total distance of over 150 nautical miles. First airport that you're taking off from, next airport has to be 50 miles away, okay, to make it cross-country. Then your next airport has to be at least 50 miles away from that. Your total, when you get back to your main airport, so that's 3 airports, your main airport, 2 other destinations, and then flying back, the total distance has to be at least 150 nautical miles. Additionally, before you can do this cross-country time solo, you have to have done 3 hours of cross-country training with your instructor to get used to what's involved in a cross-country flight, because it's a little bit different than going out near your airport or out to the practice area and coming back. There's a little bit more involved. The next thing you'll need is night cross-country training. So this is kind of getting used to some night flying combined with some cross-country. You don't have to do a solo night cross-country, but you do have to go do a night cross-country flight with your instructor to get used to night flying. On top of that, regarding nighttime, you're going to need 10 night takeoffs and night landings as part of your requirements. And the last requirement you'll need to meet in terms of training for your Part 61 private pilot is you're going to need 3 hours of instrument training, flying the plane solely by reference to instruments. Now, I'm told this didn't used to be in there, but a lot of people die from getting into a cloud and not having any training in that aspect, okay? You haven't flown yet, but I'm gonna let you know, flying in the clouds is totally different than you think. All you have to go off of is essentially your attitude indicator, which shows which way your plane is facing. You're turning left, you're turning right, you're facing down, you're facing up. All you have to reference is that. And the first time you get in a cloud, I'll tell you what, it's extremely disorienting, way more than I ever thought it was gonna be. When I started my instrument training and I first went into a cloud, holy cow, your senses are going crazy, your brain doesn't know what to make of it, you feel like you're turning, you're not turning. So this is a very important requirement of your private pilot. 3 hours with reference solely to instruments. And actually, 3 hours I don't even think is enough. It takes a while to get used to that, but it's very important. So that's the final requirement you need. So let's talk about what happens after you've met all of these requirements. You're gonna need to take what's called a check ride. A check ride is when an examiner from the FAA, they're called a Designated Pilot Examiner, DPE, you're gonna set up an appointment with them to take your check ride. First thing in the check ride, you're gonna go through your requirements. They're gonna make sure that your logbook entries are all there. All those requirements that we talked about are met. They're gonna make sure you have your FAA medical on you and that it's valid. And then after that, you're gonna move on to checking the plane itself. So the plane you'll be flying that day, there's a lot of steps that need to be taken to make sure that plane is airworthy. There's inspections that have to be met, airworthiness directives. We won't get into all of that now, but that's the next thing you're gonna do is check the plane. So once your requirements are verified and the plane is verified to be airworthy, then you're gonna move on to the oral portion of the check ride. So this is where you sit down with the DPE and you're gonna talk about everything related to becoming a private pilot. Now, there are standards that they have to stick to, and these are listed in what's called the Airman Certification Standards. So this lays out all the standards that you'll have to meet to become a private pilot. There's particular maneuvers that you have to know, knowledge items that you need to know. And overall, this oral portion of the check ride really is about talking aviation and making sure from the DPE standpoint, they know that you understand how to be a safe pilot and you understand the requirements of this certificate that you're seeking. It depends on your DPE, but this can be very relaxed or very tense. It depends kind of how you enter into it. One tip I would give you going into your check ride is just be very prepared. I have a whole other video on prepping for your check ride and making a check ride binder, so go check that out. I'll link to that below. But go in very prepared and be ready to explain some things with aviation. After you've done the oral portion of your check ride, you're gonna move on to the flight portion of your check ride. So they're gonna watch you do a pre-flight inspection on the plane, make sure you're checking all the things with that. They're gonna have you give them a passenger briefing because they always say your DPE is your first official passenger. They're only there to judge your flying. They're not gonna help you at all. They're not like an instructor where they're gonna give you little like tips and whatever. It's all on you at this point. So you do have to give them a passenger briefing, a safety briefing that's required by the FAA. Then you're gonna take off and you're gonna do a series of maneuvers that are all laid out in that Airman Certification Standard that we talked about. And once you complete that, congratulations, you're a private pilot. So you've got your private pilot certificate. Now what? Typically, after people have their private pilot certificate, they move on to their instrument rating. Let's talk about what is a rating. A rating is not a new license, it's an add-on ability to your license. Aside from ratings, there's another thing called endorsements. Endorsements are something that you can train with a CFI with, and once they feel your knowledge is appropriate and you've demonstrated to them that you can do whatever you're pursuing safely, it's just an endorsement in your logbook. That's why it's called an endorsement. That would be for something like a tailwheel aircraft. You go out with an instructor, you train, they feel comfortable that you can confidently and competently fly a tailwheel aircraft, and they endorse your logbook. A rating requires some ground knowledge and a knowledge test and a check ride. Okay, so let's talk about the instrument rating. What is an instrument rating? Well, remember that 3 hours of instrument flight time you had to have for your private pilot? That's what your instrument rating is about. It's about flying solely referencing the instruments. So imagine you covered all the windows in your airplane and you're just gonna fly based on the instruments right in front of you. That's basically instrument flying. Now, you're not gonna cover all the windows, and while you're training for this, you're gonna use a view limiting device. So it's either like a hood that comes down or some glasses that basically only allow you to see from here down to the panel, okay? So when you get your instrument rating, what does that allow you to do? Well, remember how with your private pilot, you could only fly in visual flight conditions, visual flight rules, VFR, you always have to have reference to the ground. Well, an instrument rating will allow you to fly within the clouds or without reference to the ground. Additionally, it'll allow you to be on an instrument flight plan. So essentially how it works, once you have your instrument rating is, hey, the weather's bad outside, but I need to pop through these clouds and get somewhere. So I'm going to file an instrument flight plan. And it's just basically your route and what you're going to do to get to your destination. So unlike VFR flying, there's no veering off and doing what you want to do. You're going to be on a very specific thing, and you're going to be with ATC, air traffic control, the entire time. And they're going to give you directions as you go. What does an instrument rating require? Well, first of all, you need to take an instrument ground school. Just like you took a private pilot ground school, now you're going to have to take an instrument ground school. So you're going to have to get all the book knowledge to understand what you're taking on. Then you're going to have to take a knowledge test, just like you had to do with the private pilot. Same process. You're going to take a knowledge test, and once you pass that, then you can move on with the rest of it. Now, for your instrument rating, I would suggest taking your ground school and your knowledge test before you even really start the instrument training, because sure, you can go up with your flight instructor before you've done any of that, and you can fly around just by reference to the instruments, and the more of that you can get, the better. But the problem is you're going to be burning a lot of time and money with an instructor when you still have no idea what's going on, aside from just keeping straight and level and making turns and things like that. But you're not going to understand the instrument environment yet. So I would suggest getting your ground school done and getting your written knowledge test done, then starting your actual flight time for your instrument rating. So after that, you're going to start your instrument actual flight time. And again, just like private pilot, it is 40 hours broken down into very specific things. So it's 40 hours total, whether that's simulated instruments, so you have the foggles or the view limiting device on, the hood on, or flying in the actual clouds. You have to have 40 total hours of that kind of training. And some of this can be within a simulator as well. Within that 40 hours, at least 15 of those hours have to be with a CFII. That's a CFI rated for instrument training. On top of all of those 40 hours, you also have to have accumulated over time 50 total hours of cross-country pilot and command time. So you're going to have gotten some of that on your private pilot by doing those solo cross countries and that solo long cross country. But you're going to need 50 total hours, and that's a lot. It took me quite a while to get all those hours. That's another thing I knocked out before I even started the instrument training. Just get those 50 hours of cross-country PIC done first. The other requirement for your instrument rating is that you have to have done a long cross-country, just like you did with private pilot, but now this has to be 250 total nautical miles, and this has to be with an instructor. Unlike private pilot, you are not able to go out and fly in instrument conditions by yourself if you are not rated. Do not do it. It's not allowed. It's not like your solo time with private pilot. Don't do that. And then the final piece of flight time you'll need is just to make sure that within the last 2 months before your instrument check ride, you have to have done at least 3 hours of instrument training with your instructor. So basically, don't not go flying instrument training and then try to take your check ride and it's been 3 months since you've been up with your instructor. It's not going to work. So for instrument rating, the same process applies with the check ride. You're going to qualify you as a pilot, you're going to qualify the plane, you're going to do your oral portion, and you're going to do your flight portion. Flight portion on instrument is pretty easy. You do some holding procedures, tracking courses. You've got to do 3 different types of approaches. One of those approaches has to be what's called a partial panel approach. And one of them has to be a circle to land approach, and then you practice missed approaches within that. There's a whole list of criteria, and again, all of this would be listed in your airman certification standards. I'm not going to go into every single detail on what you need to do on the instrument check ride, but it's very similar to the private pilot check ride. You train for certain maneuvers with your instructor, you do those maneuvers on the check ride. So you've got your private pilot, you've got your instrument rating. What is next for you? Well, right around this time, you should be close to the hours for your commercial certificate. So being able to fly someone for money. Remember we talked about earlier, you can't accept any money for aviation. Your commercial pilot certificate allows you to do that. So for airplane, you need 250 total hours for your commercial certificate. Again, just like all the rest of them, this is broken down into particular sections. So let's start with your commercial ground school. Same like the other 2 things we talked about, you're going to have to do a ground school first. You're going to have to take a written exam, and then you can start working on your commercial maneuvers. Now, I haven't personally done commercial yet, but I have heard that it's much less about flying than it is about regulations, because now you need to know when you can legally fly and all the different things related to you flying for money, because now you're expected to be held to a higher standard. There's regulations you have to understand. Some of them you have to memorize. It's basically just a lot of memorization of regulations. There are some flight maneuvers as well, definitely. There's some new things you've got to learn. There's not that many new things. A lot of them will be the same as the private pilot, just with tighter tolerances than the private pilot, because you should be a better pilot now that you're accepting money for aviation. So same thing, you're going to complete those commercial requirements, and let's talk about what those are within that 250 hours. And guys, I'm going to preface this by saying I'm going off of the requirements for all of these things for airplanes, okay? They vary slightly with what type of aircraft you're flying, okay? So if you're going for helicopter, the hours numbers and certain numbers and things like that are gonna be different. This is for airplane only, okay? So for commercial, you need 250 total hours, like I said. 100 of those hours have to be in powered aircraft. 50 of those hours have to be in an airplane. You need 100 total hours as pilot in command. 50 of those hours have to have been in an airplane, and 50 of those hours have to have been cross-country pilot in command, or PIC time. You already got the 50 hours cross-country PIC from your instrument rating, so if you're already instrument rated, this won't be an issue. You need 28 total hours of flight training. You've already got plenty more than that at this point. You're gonna need at least 5 hours of simulated instrument training. If you're instrument rated, again, you don't even have to worry about this at this point. Now, there is one thing that throws some people off for the commercial. You need 10 hours in a complex or technically advanced airplane, okay? So this is just to say you can't complete your commercial certificate in something like a 172, which is what you're gonna be training in to begin with. You either need to be in a complex aircraft, so that's an aircraft with flaps, retractable gear, and a constant speed propeller, or a technically advanced aircraft, so something like G1000 on autopilot, something like that. So something more advanced than what you're generally flying for primary flight training. And then there's a few overlapping requirements that you completed for private pilot and for instrument. You also need to complete a long cross country. I know, right? They're really big into the long cross countries. This one is a 300 nautical mile cross country with one of the points at least 250 nautical miles from the next point, and landings at 3 total points. So 2 other airports and your home airport, 1 leg that's at least 250 nautical miles. So that's a big one for commercial. You also need 1 training night 2-hour cross country with a distance of greater than 100 nautical miles. So a little bit more night training. So those are the main requirements for your commercial airplane. Same thing like the other things we talked about, private and instrument. You're gonna go ahead and schedule a check ride once you've met all these requirements and you get the sign off from your CFI. And then same thing like last time, they're gonna qualify you, they're gonna qualify the airplane, you're gonna do an oral portion of your check ride, and then you're gonna do a flight portion. So now you've got your commercial pilot certificate. So now you can fly passengers for money, you can fly cargo for money, you can go banner tow. There's thousands of aviation jobs out there. It's not just airline jobs. So, could you go fly for a big airline with your commercial pilot certificate? Sorry, you can't. Commercial pilot certificate is not what gets you to the airlines. So what do you need to get to the airlines? Well, that's gonna be a whole nother certificate entirely with a bunch of sub-requirements to get it. That's gonna be called your Airline Transport Pilot, or ATP. This is the big one that many people are working towards. Many of the CFIs you'll encounter are just trying to get, quote, their 1,500 hours. What is the 1,500 hours? That is your minimum total flight time you need to challenge the airline transport pilot. And again, that 1,500 total hours includes many subcategories, too many for me to go into, but there's multi-engine training, there's all kinds of extra stuff with ATP. My knowledge on ATP is nil right now, okay? But I do know that you need 1,500 total hours. And by the time you get to that point of getting your ATP, you're gonna already be familiar with this. If that's your goal within your private pilot, your instrument, and your commercial, you're gonna learn these things. That's not personally my goal for aviation. I don't wanna get my ATP, but I do wanna get my commercial. So that'll be next for me as I'm just now finishing up my instrument rating. So what would I change if I could do this all over again? Let's talk about my personal pilot journey and where I screwed up and spent thousands more than I needed to. I would do my medical first, which I did, and I would stick with that. Then I would do my private pilot ground school first and take my knowledge test, which I did that. And then I would start my flight training. Here's the thing where I wasted lots and lots of money. I don't even want to tell you how much money. It's way too much. So listen closely so you can save money, okay? I went to a flight instructor and just started flying, and I just stuck with that person. And that's great if they were a good fit. The problem was they weren't a good fit. They were a phenomenal instructor. In fact, they were award-winning. But our personalities and my learning style and his teaching style didn't add up. So what am I trying to tell you? Try out multiple instructors before you decide on one. Try out multiple schools before you decide on one. This is going to save you thousands and thousands of dollars, okay? So I started flying with this instructor, right? Great, I'm flying, I'm happy, whatever. Felt like I wasn't really progressing though. Okay, no problem. But he kept trying to instruct me the same way on landings and I wasn't getting it. So I needed a different perspective on it that I wasn't getting. So 24 hours of flight time goes by at essentially $200+ an hour. You do the math on that. I got 24 hours of flight time. I should maybe potentially be soloing at this point, right? Because you can solo after 20 hours. Not even close. I decided to change flight schools. Best thing I ever did. Should have tried out multiple flight schools before I even started. And I wish someone had told me this because it would have saved me so much money. Like, it makes me sick how much money I wasted. So I tried out a new school, went out with an instructor, loved the new school, loved the style of instruction that this instructor provided. And guess what? Within a couple flights, look who's good at landings now. I just needed a different perspective on it, on what I was doing wrong. That's the difference of finding the right flight instructor for you. And again, the first flight instructor I had was great, just not great for me. So when you're doing this, please, 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 you guys, do not make this mistake that I did. Another thing I would do over if I could do it again would be to try out different types of airplanes. I fly 172s, but my school also has Cessna 150s, which are a little bit smaller. They are half the cost. Had I started learning in a 150 early on, I could have cut my costs in half. So just another thing to consider. And even as I say this, I still don't go fly the 150s, I fly the 172s. Waste of money, honestly. If you really need to save money, that's a good way to do it. Pick a smaller airplane where the fuel burn is less and the rental cost is less, and look, times that by lots of hours, you just saved a ton of money. All right, guys, so all in, how much is it gonna cost to get your private pilot certificate? If you do it right, you can probably get it done, I would say at today's rates in early 2026, and depending on what part of the country you're in, account for $20,000. There's gonna be flight schools that can tell you you get it done in 10 or 12 or whatever. No way. And this brings me to my very last point, the thing I would do differently to save myself lots of money. Make sure you secure funding early on. Here's why. I didn't do that. I was paying out of pocket. So when I first started flying, I could only fly every other week, once every other week for 2 hours. That is not enough time to get the muscle memory you need. So if you can secure financing or have the money ready to go and account for that 20 grand in your head and say that's what it's gonna cost me, and you can fly 2, 3, 4 times a week, you're gonna go through this way quicker than I did. It was like 2 steps forward, 1 step back as I did my training. And once I got a loan to complete my training, it sped up so quickly. I was flying 2 or 3 times a week, all of it clicked. So that's my last point that I would do to save a lot of money with private pilot. Guys, I hope you liked this video. Make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. There's more videos to come. I'm gonna take you guys on adventures, walk you through other training stuff, so make sure you follow the channel. Thanks for watching Cleared for Landing. Have a good day, guys.